Hello, my name is Kurt Stahorta, and I've been a professor for over 25 years now. I have a keen interest in military history, having read quite a bit and probably absorbed many documentaries. I'm here on behalf of Connect55 to interview some of our more interesting community members, and we are lucky to have Richard Jennings here today, who has a rich history, family-wise, in the military as we approach Memorial Day. And because he is such a wealth of knowledge and information, we're going to break this down into a few different parts. So for the purposes of today's conversation, I'd love to chat with you about your family's history in the military, which goes back quite a ways based on our brief conversations that we've had up to this point. So welcome, and it's great to see you again. So let's start with, when your family's history in the military and how far back it goes, and because it covers quite a bit of ground.
Yes, well, basically, through my own research of family history and all, actually, there's two sides. The Hayes side, which actually came out of Scotland.
And this is your mother's
side?
Okay.
Which came out of Scotland, at a classical area in Aberdeen. And they migrated, to U.S. through the, at that time frame, there was a lot of Scottish people, a lot of Irish people that moved into the United States through the southern areas.
Okay, so they came through, do you know which state they came through?
They came in through, at that time, some people, like my dad's side of the family, Jenkins, came, that was, again, Scottish Welsh. They came through, like, New York City area.
Sure, Ellis Island.
Okay, the Hayes side came through New Orleans.
Okay.
And settled into the, farming areas and all there.
Sure.
On it. Far as going backwards military-wise, my great-grandfather fought in New York City during the Revolutionary War.
Wow.
Against the British.
A long way.
On the hills area there, which is central Manhattan area.
Right.
Okay, and then after New York, after everything shifted and the Revolutionary War started going south, and then of course Washington and his group moved further south towards Carolina as well. Well, after part of the enlistment encouragement at that time was if you fought for the American Revolutionary Group, then you got some land. So his reward for fighting in the Revolutionary War, he ended up some land, farmland in Kentucky.
Okay. Which was largely undiscovered.
Which was undiscovered and basically wilderness.
Sure.
So it started at that time, as far as in U.S. history. He didn't end up taking the land. He ended up going to South Carolina, where he settled there. He opened up a sort of a lumber paper factory, passed on to his sons. After he passed that on to his sons and all, then the War 1812 came around.
Sure.
He came back the second time, went
into the military. Was he called up? Or
no, it was a little bit different then.
Of course
you weren't, you just basically packed your rifle, packed your little bag with some food in it.
Sure.
Kind
of malicious.
And then they just said, okay, well, you go to South Carolina, we're going to meet you over a little place called New Orleans.
Right.
On it, in which, of course, General Jackson was at that time also doing his settling and all from Florida against the Indians uprising there. So you had the regular army at that time in Florida. So he brought his people, military, up to New Orleans for the Battle of New Orleans.
Which sort of ended the War of 1812.
That ended up, after the British lost, they left, and that, basically they lost their foothold.
Right.
Okay. After that was over with, he went on and continued his traveling to the Republic of Texas, which was under Mexican control.
Right, not a state yet.
And it was still Mexican control. He had some encouragement from the White House and all for American people to go to Mexico, get your ranch land down there, and we'll help support you. So he moved to Texas.
Which part of Texas was he in?
He moved it towards Austin area,
Okay.
Central Hill Country.
Sure.
Which later became the capital. And so when he moved there, since he had a tremendous already background and everything, he was elected when the Republic formed under General Houston. Before General Houston would take, and have the army raised.
This is Sam Houston?
Yes, he wanted to have a legislation put together. So they formed like a House of Representatives, and then you had a Senate. So my great-great-granddad, when he moved to the Republic of Texas, at that time it was declared, he became a senator. Wow. On it. And of course, at that time with turmoil, constantly moving back and forth to keep away from the Mexican army until they were defeated at San Jacinto.
We're in the mid 1840s.
Yeah,
now.
18.
I think Texas becomes a state in 1845, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. It's like I said, first they win the war. I think that was the Alamo was around 1814 period, and then after that was the Battle of San Jacinto, in which the Texas military beat the Mexican army
as a state.
Yeah, well, now they become a republic.
That's right. That's right.
After they became a republic, and the general signed over the land and all rights from the Mexican government to become Texas, they become an independent republic. At that time, was the workout from the White House and all to become a state.
Which happens in the mid 1840s.
Yeah.
So from there's additional historical ties to the military. Eventually, we find our way to.
After that, then we move up into the Civil War period.
That's right.
Even though he had a tremendous Revolutionary War, or 1812, he actually come Civil War time. Of course, Texas was on the Confederate side, on it. So, but here comes the invitation, and he became commissioned as a colonel in the Texas Army. As on his job there was more or less handling supplies.
Okay. Logistics,
the supply area. And then that's where basically he finished that. He ended up living on eastern Texas, had a farm there, and that's where he passed on, and that's where the rest of the Hayeses started developing there.
Okay. Now
on my mother's side.
He had a long run out of the military. He was no spring chicken by the time the the Civil War came around.
No, it was basically, yeah, he was, you know, up there in age. That's why they didn't say, okay, well, you're a colonel, lead these people.
That's right.
No, they sat there and said, maybe we'll, because of his amount that he did, that's why he became a colonel.
Sure.
Now they gave it to him, but they decided, well, so leading troops and all that, we're gonna, the famous was sticking behind a desk.
Well,
And
you and I both know that some of the most important elements of warfare are the logistics behind the scenes and being able to keep supplies moving and keep the armies fed and have ammunition and supply chains moving forward. So that's a lot of responsibility.
So, and then on my, so that's where the Jenkins migrated into the East Texas, and that's where my mother's side came from.
Okay.
My dad's side, the Jenkins side, again, came from Scottish and Welsh area.
Right.
They were traders. They came to New York City on it, and they settled in Pennsylvania around Scranton.
Okay.
As to, at that time it was big Pennsylvania Dutch communities. And he was actually adopted by this family from Chicago. This is where he grew up. Okay. Well, he wasn't ready to go to become a farmer. Instead, he stayed out west and became a cowboy, worked on ranches.
When you say west, you're still talking
west
about
of the Mississippi.
Okay, but not necessarily in Texas.
No.
Okay.
This is more or less out. You talk of Wyoming, Dakotas.
Wow.
Colorado, New Mexico areas where the big cattle drive.
Sure.
He was involved in that. Before World War II, he actually ended up enlisting in the military in San Antonio, Texas.
Okay.
So at that time, that was a big Army hospital, Fort Sam Houston, and different training things for the military. So, along with his adventures out west, he ended up learning clarinet playing and band stuff. So
Okay.
he enlisted into the Army band on it. And this was just prior to World War II.
World War II, sure.
So it's in between 1 and 2 that he got into the military.
Mm-hmm.
And after spending time in Fort Sam, Houston, which is San Antonio, and he ended up just around that's when he actually met my mother in Beaumont, Texas, and they got married. He was assigned to the Philippines
before the war.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay. Then, him, my mother, and my older brother were in the Philippines. That's when that Japanese started.
The Japanese were starting to expand throughout Asia.
Sure, Asian areas, and wanted the, of course, Philippines for the rubber and different things. So the military sent my brother back stateside. He had ended up going to India,
which was still part of the British Empire.
Which was at that time British Empire.
Sure.
And the British determined that, that's going to be a big last stand type thing for it to help keep it from the Japanese area.
Sure. And a lot of people don't realize that there was war waging long before we got involved in 41. Well, World War II started in 1939, the first week of September, but the Japanese and Chinese were waging war already.
Because the Japanese went into Manchuria.
That's right.
to his ancestry home failed, and then they pushed the Chinese further south into China.
Right, so when they were in India, there was active fighting going on among the Chinese and the Japanese.
Yes, at that time. But his assignment in India was, at that time, he had became a commissioned officer. He went through the Army Radio Communications Signal Corps and got his commission and becoming a radio operator and site manager. He was assigned to India up near the Nepal border area.
The border right
between China and regular India.
Rather significant mountain range
Because
right there.
at that time, you didn't have the two Pakistans. You know, it was India and the Himalayas.
That's right.
Nepal, and then China. So his position was at that time, because the Chinese was on our side,
That's right.
the British, the United States started flying resupply planes over the mountains,
Over the Himalayas.
Himalaya mountains,
Most significant
flying
mountain.
over the hump.
Yeah, most significant
And
mountain range in the
his
world.
communications helped guide the planes, and he would and communicate between the Chinese communication group and headquarters and the British headquarters to guide these planes over safely to resupply Chiang Kai-shek and the more or less the liberation of China.
And these are older airplanes going across the most significant mountain range probably in the world. So this was not easy stuff. This was pretty technical. And there was a lot of responsibility there.
Oh yes, it was. No, you didn't have like the modern mapping
No
guidance.
no
It was
GPS.
strictly paper, compass. The planes were not really heated for that elevation,
Right.
so you had, during World War II, because of the European bombers and high altitude bombing, where they had used oxygen,
Sure.
heated suits in the bombers for the
Thick leather coats.
fit, and like I said, so they had to adapt those to the cargo planes to get over to Himalayas.
Wow.
And then he spent most of the war there in that position.
So logistics are kind of a theme that's woven throughout your family's military history.
It's that and communications
Interesting.
on it. And so I came along in the late 40s,
Uh-huh.
early 50s. At that time, my mother, older brother, and my dad was stationed in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, which was the Army Signal Corps headquarters
Okay.
for communications. At that time, also, the Army was testing out the aviation. Army Air Corps came about.
Sure. If you don't mind, I remember when we spoke before, you had talked about having an interest in photography even when you were in high school in Arizona. So there was some time in Arizona, and then eventually you found your way to New Jersey. Can you talk about your high school? Because I found that to be very, very
Yeah, so
interesting.
basically, I went, my dad and the rest of my family, we came back from Germany in the 50s.
Okay.
We settled in Tucson, Arizona on it because I had some asthma problems, and Arizona was known to go there to take care of lung breathing problems.
Sure.
And he was stationed down south of Tucson. It's about an hour's drive, place called Fort Huachuca, Arizona.
Right on the border there,
It's
basically?
not too far from the border.
Mhm.
that post was established back in the old Buffalo Soldier days.
Wow.
And a battle with, Geronimo Cochise, safeguarding the stagecoach routes is where this was a major campaign headquarters area. So I grew up from elementary school through high school. My high school was what you would call nowadays a migrant, high levels type school.
Magnet school, yeah.
On it, we were basically, everybody graduating from that school were destined for higher college levels.
Sure.
On it, give example of like, that back in my day wasn't too thing was my National Science Foundation course was a course I took at University of Arizona there in Tucson in nuclear reactor program.
And this was a nuclear reactor program that was relatively new. I mean,
Yes,
this was cutting edge
that
stuff.
was developed after the atomic bombs, all that. The university just started getting into nuclear reactors.
Sure. And the Southwest, of course, has a history of the testing and the
Right, we had
development of that.
New Mexico was a big testing area, Nevada,
Sure.
So while I was in high school, I had interest in photography. I was and took courses in journalism. I worked on the yearbook and covered we had our local high school newspaper, and I'd go out and shoot pictures, local pictures from Tucson and all that.
Okay.
I wanted to venture into becoming a professional photographer, and I was looking at going, at that time, the major school was out in Santa Barbara, Brooks Institute of Photography was the school to go to.
Sure.
But again, it was a little bit expensive, so that sort of led my thing to go there. So to take care of that, I went on and looked into getting a job in the Army as a photographer. So I went down, did my testing, qualified for it, and then I got the contract to become a still photographer on it.
For the Army.
For the Army. So I took basic initial training was at Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Okay.
And that was 8 weeks. Then I went from there to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey,
And now we're back
which
in New
was
Jersey.
again the headquarters for the Army Signal Corps, and it was also where the pictorial schools were.
Sure.
For still, motion picture, and lab work.
Interesting. So how many people, just out of curiosity, would have been in your cohort while you were at Monmouth? And the reason I ask this is because I know that, having spoken with you a little bit, is that some of you became friends there, and then you kind of followed each other's trajectories as you went through your Army careers.
In my class, there was like 10 people.
Okay, so it was, you got to know each other pretty well.
I actually had a good friend who went through basic training at Fort Polk with me that again went in, became a still photographer in my class with me. Then after that he joined me into Vietnam.
Okay.
At Amarillo, in which I became a combat photographer there.
Sure.
In which involved of going out away from the normal headquarters, out with the infantry and combat armed groups.
Sure. So as we're venturing over to Vietnam, it's incredibly interesting that your family has such a long history with the military. Both sides of your family, correct?
Yes.
And it's interesting that not through Ellis Island at the time, because that came about much later, but New York, and then New Orleans, and there's the merging of two families, and we've had South Carolina, Texas, some stuff out in Wyoming and North Dakota, and New Orleans is a recurring theme, and then Arizona. Your family's covered quite a bit of ground, and now you're back in New Jersey, and you're on the verge of being shipped.
Basically, moved for my next assignment, which adventure was Vietnam.
Which will be Vietnam. So, do you remember when the war started? And do you remember where you were? And do you remember, you said you enlisted before the war, correct?
Well, I enlisted in 1966.
So it was going, sure.
Okay, the Vietnam War actually started in '54.
Right, we had advisors at that point.
Went back to Eisenhower, was
correct.
Sent our advisor teams from Fort Bragg, where the Special Forces home was.
Where we took over from the French at that point.
Right, the French lost their foothold, and part of Vietnam at that time was, you had South Vietnam and you had North Vietnam.
Sure.
On it. And we were into South Vietnam as advisors, helping to train the South Vietnamese army to have their own freedoms on it. Where the North Vietnam area is more or less Chinese communist at that time.
And there was an encroachment at that point.
Right, there was a big thing as far as one side wanted to control all of it. Mm-hmm. So, of course, so with that type of situations, we started doing after the advisors training and all that, it started escalating more for increasing troops.
So when you enlisted, you knew that eventually you wanted to be a combat photographer, true?
Yes.
Secondly, you knew that given the inevitability, or given the dynamics going on in the world, that you'd be sent to Vietnam. And that was something that you were looking forward to, or you were looking to engage in as a combat photographer?
I was looking as far as, I would say, the next adventure.
Sure.
Okay, you don't, at 18, you're not really looking at all the ramifications of what's taking place at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I knew, it was at the early stages of the war, and they're going to do some build-up. And after I graduated in New Jersey from the still photo course, at that time, the way the class graduations were that, one class would go to Europe, and one class would go to Vietnam.
What were the pictures of Vietnam at that time? What was the narrative? It was, we're building troops up and we're helping the South Vietnamese against the spread of communism at that point.
It was, along that way, and that, we're trying to build up more democracy, versus a communist dictator type of thing. So it was, at that time, it was really supporting of Vietnam. So it wasn't until later on, after Vietnam kept going on and on, that the time of war, I would say, was more or less getting old.
Right, and the narrative started to change.
And the country, things started changing.
So when you went to Vietnam initially, do you remember landing on the tarmac and being hit with the heat that most people describe as being unique to Vietnam?
Yes, basically, I flew in to Long Binh, which was just north of Saigon.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the Manning Army Air Force type location. And so all new soldiers would go into Long Bend. Then you'd be shipped out from there to your different units.
Okay.
So when you land, I remember the plane I was on, it was a Granite Airlines, burnt orange interior, and going over, we had an event. We actually, engine went out. We ended up landing in Philippines, getting a new engine.
Oh my gosh.
Then we flew into Vietnam. So you had a whole bunch of new soldiers getting to Vietnam. So glad to get off that plane.
Sure.
And really being happy being there on it. But you were hit with, like I said, it was like that afternoon, you were hit with extreme, 90+ degree temperature.
Because you're standing on the tarmac.
And
It's not like a traditional
it
airport.
was not a asphalt runway. It was a corrugated tin with sandbags underneath it and sand. That makes you look back in the old War II movies of, say, John Wayne landing on an island, building these landing pads where the big planes come in.
Right.
Where you just plow the ground, lay this stuff on top of it, and it links together, and that's what you flew in on it. So it's, but yes, it's, once you were hit with the temperature and of course humidity on it, sort of staggered you a little bit. And
here we are.
Then,
so you get sent to an attachment. Is that an appropriate word?
I was sent to, at that time, assigned to 6th 9th Signal Battalion Photo Detachment.
Okay.
Which was what was covering the war photos, video, and for Department of the Army.
Okay.
The main headquarters for that was actually in Kaiserslautern, Germany, was where the 6th 9th Signal Battalion headquarters was.
Is that where all the film would go?
No, it would go into Saigon to the photo detachment, the film being developed, prints made. They would go through them, and the photos and video at that time, motion picture film would be sent to the Defense Information Center that was in southern part of Manhattan.
Okay.
Was where, and that had a history of actually going back to World War II, where that was where they made the Army training films and documentation from World War II videos on it. So all the photos would be processed, labeled, and then sent there. And then it would be from there released to the civilian press.
Sure.
It'd be sent to the Army historical files. So that we would have this vast load of history.
Oh, sure. That we
available.
That we watch today, or at least I do. When you were sent to your detachment, were you the only Army photographer that was with that detachment, or was there also a movie? The video.
In Saigon there, where the photo detachment was located, headquarters, it was made up of still photographers. It was made up of laboratory specialists who developed the process and print everything.
Okay.
It was made up of the motion picture teams.
That were also Army?
That was all Army.
Okay.
Okay, and then this was located on the eastern side of Towson Air Force Base, which was the big Air Force base that made history to the from location.
Sure. If you don't mind me asking, when did you notice the trend toward the media starting to get involved quite actively in both photography and the films as well. Did you start seeing that ramp up over the course of your time there?
I noticed that after I worked out of Saigon for a while, then I was assigned to another sub detachment at Cameron Bay,
Mm-hmm.
which was a big supply hub for Republic of Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
So in my area there, we made up of like only a small group of like 10 people. Okay. Out of that group, to actually go out to make pictures and video and everything, we volunteered for it.
Okay.
On it. So I've teamed up with one of the photographers that been there a little bit longer.
He was sort of a mentor.
He was
showed
a mentor,
showed you the ropes. Yeah.
And I'd go up with him for a while until he ended up coming back stateside.
Okay.
Then I would again pick up other ones. Through Vietnam, at main headquarters, Army headquarters areas, you had press camps where the military photographers, the civilian media, news, and again, there were motion picture people, there's still people that meet at these press camps, and that was also a main hub as far as resupply for me. If I need film,
Sure.
it would be sent to one of these camps that I would be working nearby, go in and pick it up, send my film along with my report of what I covered back to my unit.
To describe the photos that you took.
Right.
So let's pivot a little bit. So we have all of the foundation laid for what I'm assuming is going to be me channeling questions that others might have of your very interesting time. So the first time you went out in the bush, as it were, how long after you arrived and after you got trained by your mentor did you start volunteering for?
Actually, it was within a month.
Within a month. That, I didn't realize it transitioned that quickly.
No, it was like I said, I ended up in Saigon at the detachment headquarters there. Then they needed some people at the next company, little detachment, and that was at Cameron. They liked, only like about 10 people there. So we had a junior grade officer, like a lieutenant. We had a middle grade sergeant, generally staff sergeant, sergeant for class, and then it was made up of still photographers, motion picture photographers, and then lab people.
Okay. So a month in, you volunteer to go out to where the stuff's happening. Do you remember your first trip of combat trip, as it were, if you were classified that way?
Actually, I knew it was one of my first experiences. I was along the coast, north of Cameron Bay, and we had a central supply area called Clinton.
How'd you get there?
By helicopter.
Had you been on a helicopter before?
The last time I was on a helicopter was when I was in the photo school. You had to learn to lean out from the helicopter and take pictures of, for mapping. Makes
sense. I mean, if you're going to be doing it, you might as well be trained on how to do it.
So we would go from Fort Monmouth to Lakehurst, New Jersey, which was where the Thunderbolts and blimps were housed. So that's where I learned to lean out the door. And you had a strap on your back, and you had the helicopter mechanic holding on the strap
Wow.
because you were, it was, you were just technically leaning out like this for that strap, and there was no shoe for your feet to go into.
Wow.
So you were just hovering like that,
So
and you could have, if you slipped, that we joked about it as far as say, well, if you don't fall, make sure you turn around, give the camera back to the mechanic.
make sure the pictures are safe.
Got it. So that's where I learned to work photos out of helicopter.
I have to ask. Whenever I've read or I've seen movies or documentaries, obviously the doors were open as you're describing. Was there a machine gun next to you while you were doing some of these, or usually they were? Was that?
If as far as not in that particular one, I was just going for as the helicopter I went out on was a resupply.
Kind of a transport.
They were taking hot food out
Okay.
to the unit I was going to.
So you get out there, you're at your unit, and tell me what was the purpose of this particular engagement? What was the mission behind you going there?
The mission was to document their activity.
Right.
They were a group of infantry soldiers, and it was supported by 3 tanks. And we were near the China Sea area.
Okay.
So it was beaches, that type, pretty rice paddies and all. The job was to go from village to village to more or less, look and see if they could find things.
Sure.
On it. My first experience actually combat with them was in the middle of the night on the second day there was, we actually ended up with some rockets coming in.
Okay.
And of course, new at it, you were trying to see what you're going to do on it. And I was on one side of the tank, and they were facing out the other way, and they let off some rounds to where the rockets came in.
Did you ever experience the sound of a tank like that before?
No, just in movies.
How did that? Could you describe that?
It was a little bit of high anxiety. It was like, what next is going to take place?
Sure.
And that's where your mind was thinking.
Did you have a weapon on yourself at this point? Because you're now part of the engagement for all practical purposes. If you're next to a tank.
Basically, it's the weapon for a still photographer goes back to World War II days, because your job is to take the pictures versus fighting. So you're only equipped with an Army pistol, 45 caliber,
which has a range of
maybe if you're really good, 50 yards on it. So they were not really accurate. Hopefully 25 gets within 25 feet, then you better reach for it.
Sure.
Otherwise, the time in which comes a time in which you put the camera down, and then you start looking for a rifle to pick up.
Did you ever get to a point where you were involved in any skirmishes to the point where you had to put down your camera?
Yes. Back in November '67, one of the major battles of Vietnam, and this was just prior to the Tet Offensive.
Which was 68, February.
Yes. Okay, so this was started November 3rd was when it started. And I happened to got through one assignment for the Department of the Army, and I was at one of the major Army headquarters area in Clecoot, that's along the southern Central Highland area, the big Army combat arms.
So if it's okay, I'd like to leave our audience hanging right there, as you would in a movie that has many parts, and we'll pick it up where you were involved in that very intense engagement in November, and we'll talk about its significance in leading up to the Tet Offensive, which of course was something that all of us who study Vietnam understand its significance. So we'll leave right there, and we'll look forward to part 2. Thanks so much.
Forward to it.
Thanks.